I was stood on the tail, had me back to the door, and I just heard, He walked in. I thought it was somebody doing a very good impersonation. Here we are inside the historic Dun Cow, perhaps the finest bar in the whole of Sunderland, if not the North East, and with Paul Callaghan, who has been kind enough to let us have a close look around the building. Paul, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Paul Callaghan. I'm the chairman of the Music, Arts and Culture Trust, sometimes called the MAC Trust. And this pub was bought as part of the development of the Culture Quarter around the fire station. Here and the Peacock were both bought as income generators for the auditorium at the fire station.
And that was when?
We bought the Dun Cow in 2014, we bought the Peacock in 2017.
It is what a journalists are obliged to call an architectural gem, and it's what your dad referred to as a proper pub. Generations of visitors to the Empire Theatre next door have called in before and after a show, as have some very famous performers. It's a very accommodating place, although 30 years ago it was somewhat woollier. I was once a young man, and to prove it, here's a picture of me, taken last year. Not long before the picture was taken, and following a big money transfer from the Greens, I worked as a barman in the Dun Cow for a year and a half. It was an experience. Happy hour at the time was 11 AM till 1:30 PM. Then again at 4 PM until 6 PM. An hour which lasted 270 minutes, and there were still complaints when it ended. Highlights included sing-songs for the minimally talented, domino cards, a gentleman who could imitate a duck laying an egg, and the occasional physical threat. During the 1990 World Cup, there was a memorably poor Mexican wave performed by just 6 patrons. It lasted for 15 minutes, but only stretched from the side entrance, which is behind that partition, all the way here to where the fruit machine was. Now that mirror. I'm afraid most of the stories from my time here are post-watershed. Some of the regulars were pensioners who had earned their money. Others were perfectly respectable people in gainful employment. A third group was less transparent about their income. The Dun Cow back then occupied a different world, and it required considerable but welcome change to make the civilised watering hole it is today, where the beer is delightful and the conversation endlessly varied. There has been a pub on this site since 1834 at least. This particular building was completed in 1901, 6 years before the Empire Theatre next door. It was built at the behest of Robert Duker Limited, a huge Edinburgh-based brewery and pub chain of the time, who also owned the Black Bull, now Vesta Tilly's, Norfolk Hotel and the Crown and Thistle further down High Street West, demolished in 1966. Sunderland builders Thomas Pearson Shafto were awarded the contract, and construction cost a whopping £2,000. The Dun Cow is a 4-storey building, 5 including the cellar. The second floor has usually been occupied by the pub's management over the last 123 years, but it's now the offices of pub culture. Many years ago I made my only visit to the 4th floor. Back then it contained little more than the innards of the then broken clock and the odd dead pigeon. Matters have improved quite a bit since then. The architect was one Benjamin Ferdinand Simpson, described on the Dun Cow's own website as somewhat eccentric. The building is wonderfully ornate, with a corner turret topped by a copper dome bearing 2 clock faces. The clock was finally repaired in 2019. I know for a fact that it hadn't worked since the 1980s. Mr. Simpson designed a number of other beautiful buildings in the area, including Emerson Chambers in Newcastle, now occupied by a branch of Waterstone's bookshop and strikingly similar to the Dun Cow. He died in Sussex in 1940. The eccentric aspect of the architect is reflected in the ornamental exterior of the pub, a veritable sandstone menagerie. Take a close look and you'll see a cow, which seems reasonable. The appearance of a cat, frog and lizard require further explanation.
This pub was built in 1901. It was actually on quite a difficult site, and in order to make sure that the pub didn't overbalance, they put in a keystone, which actually is a huge piece of stone on the front of the building, and that makes sure that the building doesn't tipple backwards. And instead of just leaving it as a stone, what they've done is they have engraved and carved into that stone, and it's a lovely feature of the pub in that there are lots of little animals who just peek out of the carving.
English heritage also makes much of the building's nook shafts, graduated slate, moulded segmental door hoods, curved mullion, and loads of other stuff that hardly anyone understands. However, it's the interior of the pub that really puts it on the map. The ceiling, but more particularly the wooden bar fittings with its indoor Gothic web, were painstakingly restored by experts in 2014. Camera have described the Art Nouveau back bar as one of the most stunning in Britain. Beyond saying it is intricately ornate, it is difficult to do the bar justice. It has to be seen in the flesh, as it were, which is why it's a minor tourist attraction. The story goes that in the 1970s, after his show at the Empire Theatre, Hollywood musical and Dallas star Howard Keel gazed at it admiringly and thought, "Oh, what a beautiful back bar," before attempting to buy it and have it shipped to his home. He was prevented from doing so as the bar is listed, as indeed is the whole building. There are at least 7 dun cows in historic County Durham, which includes Sunderland. Don't forget there is no such thing as Tyne and Wear. Tony Blair and George W. Bush famously frequented the Dun Cow in Sedgefield in 2003. Dun, D-U-N, means greyish brown. We assume you know what a cow is. Unlike today, when pubs are named after the first thing that comes into a new owner's head, there is reason for the name. In fact, it is religious in origin. The story goes that in the year 995, some monks were moving the body of Sid Cuthbert, who had died in 687, to a place called Dunholm, H-O-L-M, meaning Hill Island, later called Duarsum, and finally Durham. Devoid of sat-nav, the clerics couldn't find Dunholm, but they overheard a milkmaid telling her milkmaiding colleague that she had lost her dun cow. She was told that the animal had been seen grazing near Dunholm, H-O-L-M. This meant the monks could locate the appointed plot. Cuthbert was duly planted on the site, which became Durham Cathedral. The tale is probably apocryphal. The dun cow has attracted many celebrities in its time due to its proximity to the Empire Theatre. When I worked here, there was a delightful old gentleman whose name I have sadly forgotten, told me about Vesta Tilley. The gentleman must have been about the same age as the pub, and he could recall meeting this music hall superstar in here as a youngster. In the 1950s, Laurel and Hardy called in. Stan had been well acquainted with Sunderland since his youth. Alas, when I worked here, the glitterati never surpassed visits by Bella Emberg, who was touring with Russ Abbott, and Frank Carson. I can confirm that Mr. Carson would regularly opine, "That's a cracker," in real life too. In 1991, shortly after I had found another job, the ballet dancer Rudolf Nureyev called in for a Guinness while he was in town. Nureyev was world famous. He was a true international star. So naturally, I wasn't here. Although I did see Stu Francis of Crackerjack fame in here a week later. There were some wilderness years for the Dun Cow before it was taken over by the Mac Trust in 2014 as part of the £36 million regeneration of Sunderland's building heritage. It's been a huge success, with the surrounding area something for Waysiders to be proud of. It's part of a clump of listed buildings, which includes the Peacock, Empire Theatre, Mowbray Arms Houses, the Minster and the Court. The Dun Cow is more than just a pub, it's what we journalists are obliged to refer to as an institution.